Welcome to this super exciting conversation for today. My name is Knox Robinson. I'm a writer, marathoner, the founder of the infamous Black Roses NYC running crew. And I'm super excited to be at the wheels today for this conversation for Fit for Us. Fit for Us is a super exciting organization for folks who are just joining us for the first time. It came together with a small group of folks who were working at the center and at the margins in the fitness and wellness industry. And given so many of the events of 2020, we felt like we really needed a space just to connect and see what happened from there. So that connection might take the form of advocacy. That space might take the form of networking. It might, kind of just be a space of support for other folks who are really on the front lines of, these current events that we're experiencing today. This conversation for today, as we partner with Color of Change, came about as we started to think about the increased pressures, the increased levels that Black folks, people of color, are facing on the road to this upcoming election. And so for those of us who are working in fitness and working in wellness, what are some tools that we can look to have at our disposal, but also what are some things that we can do to share with our community? I've had a personal mindfulness and meditation journey, but really we're excited to have an expert on deck. It's Dr. Allycin Hicks. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Hicks a few minutes before this call started. She is a PhD in clinical psychology. She refers to herself as a life coach, but after she provided me those bona fides, she's like, but the main thing is I'm really Black. So that's definitely a calling card for Fit for Us. And that's definitely a calling card for someone we want to talk to when it comes time to thinking about the intersection of wellness, meditation, mindfulness, and what it means for our personal health and our community health, especially as we go into what Barack Obama once called silly season. So Dr. Hicks, thanks for joining us. This is super special, and I'm excited to connect with you today.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. Y'all got me up early on a Saturday morning. This is the love, right? You're seeing the love that I have for y'all. But I always love having expansive conversations about different ways that melanated folk can take care of themselves, different ways we can cope with, as you said, silly season, which is, it's even so much, we've gotten even so much more than silly at this point. But how do we deal with it? So I'm really glad that you're creating the space for people to tap in and understand.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, in addition to silly season, it's also sad season, right? As the days are getting shorter, and it's just a reality of where we live. But all these kind of things. Before we dive into the woods, in my own experience, I noticed that these things have a force multiplying effect. So what you're reading and absorbing from the news is what you're experiencing, like compounded by your workplace or your search for work, and then family situations on top of that, and relationships in general. So yeah, it does kind of, and then the weather, right? So we're both in California, and it's a little overcast today. It's very un-Cali weather today. So thanks for popping up early on the west side and getting into it. Did you want to begin by just kind of like setting the tone and setting some intentions for this conversation?
Absolutely. So did we want to do like a mindfulness exercise or just kind of set a general intention for today?
It's up to you. It's ladies' choice. I'm going to leave it at your disposal.
I love it. So let's sit back and let's take some deep breaths. And I'm going to pull out my handy dandy singing bowl. So everyone find themselves in a comfortable seat. We're only going to do this for a few moments. You can choose to close your eyes or not. But find yourself experiencing calm, and shifting your focus toward your breathing. For now, just notice as the breath enters and as it leaves. Notice the sensation. Don't try to change your breathing or become worried or concerned about it. Just notice. Notice the rise and fall of your abdomen. Just notice the sensation. Get curious about your breath. Place an intention on today, a positive phrase. I am powerful. I am driven. I am blessed. Hold that intention in your mind. Repeat to yourself your intention. Allow that intention to wash over you. From your head to your toes. Now release it like a wave coming and going, allowing your subconscious to take the intention on. Become more focused on the space around you. Wiggle your toes, move your shoulders, open your eyes. Become present. All right, y'all. So,
Dr.
to me,
Hicks, yeah.
did you like it? Did you like it? Yeah, for me, I think there's something powerful in creating and holding intentions and then allowing them to go, because that's when manifestation, that's when problem solving is really able to start enacting itself. I think sometimes we hold on too tightly to things, too tightly to ideas, and the idea of mindfulness is an act of allowing, right? So sometimes we just allow, and in order to allow, we do have to let go. And so I think that's something important about intentions. It's important about manifestation. It's important about helping your brain create the life that you want. It's about also being able to hold on, simultaneously hold on to something and let it go. So that's why I included that part.
I have to admit, I had a whole script I was going to ask you, so many intelligent sounding questions, but I got caught off guard because right when you brought in the sonics, you said, just notice. And there in a lightning bolt, that's a practical definition for mindfulness. A lot of times in this era, maybe some of our friends do it, maybe some people in our family do, maybe we do or we don't, or we've tried to, get on the apps and try to figure it out, or we've gone through some yoga classes, at the local center. But what is mindfulness, and what does it mean for us? What is mindfulness for us?
Mindfulness is in the most concrete form, it's the act of being present, right? In the psychological perspective, when we look at like things like depression is existing in the past. A lot of people with depression have ruminating thoughts, which keeps them kind of focused on the mistakes they've made. Anxiety is future thoughts. We're often worried about what will come, what will be, and we're in this feverish attempt to fix and plan and prepare for a future that hasn't yet come. Mindfulness is the act of here, the act of now, the act of just be, the act of just notice, the focusing on the conversation I'm having, focusing on the way I'm moving my arms, focusing on how my right big toe is more numb than my left big toe. That is the act of being mindful. That is the act of being present. And the reason that matters is the only time that we can actually live is now. There obviously are many metaphysical, theories that, time is all happening actually at one time and all this, but we've evolved to perceive only one time. And this is the only space in which we are allowed to create the future that we want to create, process the past that we've experienced. But this is the only time we have. And if we don't practice existing in it, it becomes more difficult for us to create change in our lives. That's why I think it is very important.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times when you hear mindfulness or meditation as a buzzword, or you see it in the feed, and it's an exciting time that so many folks are kind of unlocking this. But I think it's really interesting, and what I love speaking about with experts such as yourself is really how practical it is and how like daily and basic. I mean, there's the stereotypes, of course, where it's somebody sitting on a mountaintop, like looking down at the, whatever. But it really has so many practical aspects to life. So can you kind of go back to those definitions and really kind of continue to embroider on that theme? What does it really mean for us in this moment? Speaking of moments, as we're kind of going into a peak stressful moment as a people, as we're emerging from the trauma of this year and the stress of this year and the confusion, the disorientation of this year, and with no end in sight. Can you kind of talk about the potential of mindfulness right now?
Yeah, it's also a detachment. When you are mindful, you are truly able to look at your current experience almost as if you're an outside observer. There's a perspective of mindfulness where you observe, you participate, and you describe what's happening. So you watch yourself, like right now I'm speaking to Knox, he's wearing a green shirt, he has cool hair, he has a great book, some books in the background. I can engage and become focused on these books, I can become focused on all these things that are happening, but I'm choosing to focus on Knox. It's an awareness of the present space. And the reason this is important is because for the Black community in particular, we've had a lot of trauma. We have, the video of George Floyd over and over and over and over again. And what can start to happen is you can start to find yourself almost dissociating, in a way, leaving your body and becoming George Floyd, right? I've actually found myself when I watch those videos, I stop breathing. I find myself holding my breath as I'm watching, and I just become anxious, and I start to feel it in my chest. I start to feel it coming over my shoulders, almost like I'm wearing like a backpack is kind of how I feel it. And then I have to become mindful again and realize I am Allycin, right? And then you can step out when you're able to practice a sense of kind of like daily moment by moment mindfulness. You're able to step outside of some of the things that may cause you some direct trauma, but actually are not directly happening to you. And I think also for African American people, for Black people, for melanated people, we are collective. We are a group. And so it is so much harder for us to distance ourselves emotionally in moments when we need to take care of self, put our mask on so we can put on, someone else's later. And so I think mindfulness is that ability to be able to recognize like, oh, I have to take care of myself for a moment. Let me get back into my body, process how I'm feeling, And then I can go back to what I was doing.
One of the interesting things about mindfulness is also one of, I think, from my observation, is one of the deterrents from
Mhm.
kind of helping folks unlock it, is that in an instant, it brings together these huge, profound ideas with something very simple on a daily level. So in your comments just now, you're speaking on like metaphysical levels and like our reckoning with the murder of George Floyd filmed on a phone. And at the same time, you're talking about daily steps. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that, like not the big scope and not that trajectory of connection, but can you talk about what those daily little steps mean? Do I have to like stand on my head? Do I have to have like some expensive green tea and burn incense? And like, do I need that bowl you have? Like, do they have that bowl at Target? Like,
Where do I
talk
get
to
it?
how
Amazon.
do we get started? How do we get started?
One thing I tell my clients all the time, because you're totally right. Like we have this image of this, person sitting on top of a mountain in robes, and they've been meditating at Vipassana for 15 years, and they don't speak anymore. And and I think it's overwhelming for people to think like, oh my God, like to be this mindful person, do I really have to live this life? Growing up, I lived 2 houses down from a Buddhist monastery. And so we would see a line of monks every morning, and they wouldn't wear shoes, and they had like shaved their heads, and they were wearing their robes, and they would walk through the neighborhood silently every morning. And I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. And so for me, that was like what mindfulness was. And I started meditating at like 9. And so I would sit there and I would always practice. I wanted to float, right? That was my goal. I was like little 9-year-old me. I was like, if I get this right, I'm going to float. And it was such a big thought. And what I tell people now is like, we're in a different space. 2020, COVID, real life is different. Mindfulness can be integrated into every day, like just the daily things that you do. You can mindfully cook. You can mindfully eat. You can mindfully wash dishes. One thing I tell people, I think it's kind of funny, but one of the first things I tell people to do in a kind of like busy person mindfulness practice is to meditate and be mindful while you're on the toilet. Because in our new lives, we're very busy. Our houses might be full of people. There's a lot of multi-generational generational homes out there where you might not have a lot of time to just kind of sit back and do this like 4-hour meditation in the morning. So try to take the moments where you can. And even for moms, sometimes you can get a moment in the bathroom, but a lot of times the kids will not allow it. But that is one of the most private spaces. So when you're in the shower, when you're on the toilet, just take a few moments to just experience existing. What does your existence feel like? What do your feet feel like on the floor? What does the water feel like hitting you if you're in the shower? What does it feel like to sit on the rim of the toilet seat? I think it's, it's kind of funny, but I think it's one of the only private moments we have, and you can integrate mindfulness into anything. You can mindfully communicate, you can mindfully listen, mindfully breathe, mindfully walk. And I think we need to lean into those moments.
That's interesting too, to kind of bring it down to that practical example, right? You're a coach, I'm a quasi running coach, and a lot of folks in the Fit for Us community are trainers and coaches who are the bread and butter is like bringing people on that journey. So coach me a little bit, or coach us a little bit on this mindfulness journey. Maybe not, getting us to the Super Bowl of mindfulness, but take us into that preseason. So we're just starting with some daily intention setting, or some daily kind of like moments, whether it's in the bathroom or just in a quiet space. But what happens? I mean, a lot of times people want to know, it's like, say in a training context, you hire a trainer, you have your goals, you got to get summer body, you got to get ready for this wedding, you got to get ready for your high school reunion. And then the trainer's like, well, okay, cool, I'm gonna do it, but it's not really like that. So the mindfulness, we want to arrive at mindfulness, we want to achieve mindfulness, I get it, but what happens? Can you set some expectations? Can you kind of describe these initial stages after we sit? The first time we sit for 5 minutes, we're like, I can't concentrate, I'm not doing this anymore, let me just go back to whatever I was doing before.
I love that, because I think making things real and making things palatable is so important, because we have these like large esoteric ideas, and it's like, well, what in the heck is it for real? So mindfulness is a tool. I think a lot of people come to me and they treat mindfulness as a goal. Like I want to be like mindfulness is where I want to be. No, mindfulness is a mechanism. That's like saying I want to be walking or I want to be running. You run for a reason. Some people run because it takes them to another place. Some people run because they love the way it feels. Some people run because it's a great exercise. It's a tool to get where you want to be. To be that size, whatever. And so the goal is actually really personal, right? It's like if you're a person who, for example, like I deal with anxiety, right? A lot of us deal with anxiety. 2020, like, is anxiety if it was a year, okay? And so you have this thing that you don't enjoy. You have this thing that you don't like, this anxiety, this sadness, depression, whatever you may be dealing with, and you want less of that. You want to experience more joy in your life, more fulfillment, more focus. So in order to amplify some of the positive things, it does require a level of noticing, of being, right? And so what ends up happening with mindfulness, it's difficult, is people have to have a benchmark and have to have an idea of what they want. And so one of the first things I do, even before I start with a lot of mindfulness in coaching, is I get an idea of what is this person in front of me? What is their goal? What do they want? What do they want their life to look like? And I'll give an example from my personal life. So I've always been an anxious person. I hated flying. I've always been a petrified flyer. So one day to get on a plane, I had some Xanax. I'd never taken Xanax in my life. And I took a piece of it. And about 20 minutes later, I was like, is this how the rest of the world feels? Because I'd never in my life not been anxious in my entire life. And so now I had a benchmark to hit when I was meditating. Now I knew the feeling and the sensation that I wanted. And so sometimes what we have to do is be presented with, what is it that we want? What does that thing feel like, even for a small moment? So then we can start to notice how we go about getting it. So mindfulness is a tool. So the first step to mindfulness for me is general awareness. So what I'll have people do is describe, like I did earlier, like you're wearing a green shirt, I see a little white triangle kind of popping off at the top, which might be a part of the larger design. I see, a lot of red books behind you, some orange books. I see a pink book. So this is actually an act of mindfulness in paying attention to your space. So I tend to start people with concrete forms of mindfulness first, with numbering things, with naming things, because you're totally accurate in that people will sit down and expect themselves to have this transcendental moment where they leave their body and telepath to another consciousness and they're flying through the stars. And that is just not what happens, especially not the first time. You're going to have
but what you're describing something almost the opposite, right? You're talking about like everything but that experience as the beginning for that. So that's kind of a contradiction.
Yeah, because you have to ground yourself, because the body is also mindful. Being present in your skin is mindful. It doesn't have, and I just did a chakra alignment for myself a few weeks ago, which I'm actually working to turn into a class. You have to start with rooting. Right. One of the first things I like to teach people, because a lot of us want to go to your third eye. You want to be in your crown chakra. You want to have these out of body experiences where you're having this ideal optimal space and experience. But you have to ground yourself first. Right. I teach people grounding techniques. So these are like walking meditations. So you'll leave your house or you'll walk in your house and you'll just literally say to yourself, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. This is a way that we begin to learn to hone our mind and hone our focus, because you will meditate and you will experience what we call monkey mind, which is this just like just constant thoughts that just race and run. And that's okay. There are days when people who have been meditating for 20 years have just all these thoughts. And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. It's about accepting that. But I like to start people off grounded. I like to start people off with like, I count sometimes when I get worried or upset, and I want to be mindful, because the things that you're counting are happening right now. They're not happening yesterday. They're not happening tomorrow. They're happening now. And that inherently is mindful. And so I think we also need to adjust what our perspective on mindfulness is. It is about understanding like what your body is doing in space and time. It is understanding what's happening around you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, especially for a lot of folks in our community, we're kind of coming out of a strong religious tradition, a strong spiritual tradition. And that's one of the things that's given our community its survival and its integrity, as much as it has provided some contradiction there as well. What about folks who may be a little nervous about approaching mindfulness if they're coming out of a church background, a mosque background, a temple background, a strong family structure that was kind of rooted in a tradition that was prayerful, but not necessarily mindfulness based. Do you have any insight on that?
I think there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. When I was young, I grew up in a very conservative Christian faith, and they told you that meditation was demon worship. Like, that's what I was taught. That if you clear your mind, then you're allowing space for the devil to come in and, like, put a lot of ideas in your head. And mindfulness doesn't have to be clearing your mind. Like I said, it's focus. You can mindfully pray, and you can also unmindfully pray. Sometimes we get into these prayers that are just the same prayers that we preach, that we do every single day. And we might not be doing it in a way that we did the first time. We might not be doing it in a way where we're fully in the flow. So you can pray with mindfulness, because mindfulness is something that doesn't belong to a religion. It doesn't belong to an organization. It belongs to humanity. We all do things with mindful intention and without. And so you don't have to step out, and you don't necessarily have to read the Bhagavad Gita. You don't necessarily have to read Hindu scripture or, sutras from Buddhism. You can read the Bible, you can read the Quran, you can read, the Talmud, with mindful intention. You can focus on the curves of the letters. You can focus on the meaning of the word. How does this word hit you today in a different way than it hit you before? What does this particular scripture mean to you? And you can read it, and then you can sit back and you can close your mind, you can close your eyes and open your mind and think, what is the experience of this verse? What is God, what is Allah telling me right now in this moment? And so you can do anything with mindfulness. You does not have to be an either or, because I think spiritual practice can be amplified by this experience of existing fully in it.
Yeah, we do know there are those verses in scripture that reveal themselves to have additional levels of meaning or opposite levels of meaning. Like, every great spiritual tradition has these jewels that actually reveal themselves to indicate the opposite than their first reading. And now that you explain it like that, it really is interesting the ways in which mindfulness brings your attention into something. So even if, or especially when you're reading, something from Bhagavad Gita or the New Testament or the Quran, like you're able to kind of perceive, down into it in a way. That's fascinating.
Yeah, use it to amplify your practice. I don't think you have to choose. Because mindfulness is something we can all tap into. And I think what's happened in American tradition in particular is kind of this colonialization of a lot of religions, this perspective of having to separate, right? And I think that a lot of traditionally collective people, we've been all about inclusion. We've been about bringing in practices, bringing things together, amplifying my prayers every day with a full presence in the, how do I fully experience the Holy Spirit? How do I fully experience Allah? And so I think mindfulness can really amplify things. And also, the more spaces in your life you practice it, the easier it becomes for you to practice it when you need it. Right. So if you practice it when you don't need it, just when you're feeling good, you're about to enter into a space of prayer, you're about to reflect on scripture, you're in a good space, that's practice. So now you're teaching your body how to be present and how to not take that verse and then think like, oh my God, I'm not doing well enough. I'm not doing good enough in my life. And the Lord is, you're taking yourself out of mindfulness when you do that. You're taking yourself out of the present moment, but focusing in on a non-judgmental present state.
Mm. It's interesting when you kind of reflect on that community piece. Some of the genesis for us at Fit for Us as an organization was really coming together to understand to a greater degree the poignancy of working as Black and brown bodies in this space. So not only were those spaces closed in many cases in the pandemic, not only was then an additional heightened layer of our Blackness and our brownness in those spaces as professionals. And then the safety concerns of being frontline and in many ways, yes, coaching, yes, teaching, but also serving a client base. And so there's a lot of pressure and a lot of intensity that comes with being in the kind of line of work that those of us in Fit for Us find ourselves. How might mindfulness apply to fitness professionals? How might mindfulness apply to coaches and trainers in this space when our bodies are under assault from the soundtrack that the studio manager is playing, that the client base is placing demands on us in various forms or fashion? We're looking for work and the space is competitive and our pay is not competitive many times, statistically speaking. And then you do a good day's work and come home, and all of a sudden, many times we're living in a food desert and there's a public health crisis on our doorstep. Those are so many levels that we're besieged with. But you'd think that perhaps a mindfulness practice would have something to speak to that.
I absolutely think it can, because I also think mindfulness has more recently been usurped by this kind of toxic positivity culture. This idea that mindfulness will always lead to joy and bliss and dancing down the street, even if everything around you is difficult and frustrating. But what mindfulness does is it just connects you to the present moment, even if the present moment isn't great. And I think that when it comes to, the stress of being not employed right now, or being underemployed right now, or being on the front lines, or just existing, right? There's a lot, especially for Black and brown people, there's different pressures placed on us than we're seeing in some other, areas of society where staying at home is easy for certain occupations, but for others, it's just not even possible, right? As a, choreographer or a dancer or a performer or a singer or a coach, you have to be in people's faces. You have to be with people at a time like this. And so a part of the mindfulness is also just admitting the reality, admitting what's happening, and sometimes being in it. Last night, I watched this movie on Netflix that people were talking about called Over the Moon. Saddest thing I've ever watched in my life. And I cried a lot. And mindfulness is also that, right? It is tapping and connecting to your current emotion. If you are feeling overwhelmed and you don't know what the solution is, that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to know the answers to everything. You don't have to know how to solve every problem. You don't have to, be quote unquote strong in the face of adversity. You can cry, you can be angry, you can be upset, and you get to mindfully be upset. Because an unmindfully angry person can be dangerous, can be destructive, but a mindfully angry person can be transformative. Right? So it doesn't erase negative emotions. It allows us to use them. It allows us to be with them, and it allows us to understand them, because what has happened, I think, a lot in the Black and brown communities is we have a lot of pressures placed on us by society. And so we're not historically allowed to experience a lot of emotions. Slaves didn't get to process their sadness. When you're out in the fields, you got to be in the fields, whether you're happy, sad, mad, or whatever. It doesn't matter how you're feeling. And I think that has epigenetically passed down through our DNA into us now, where we have this perspective that me struggling is not okay. I have to do something to get rid of the struggle. No, the struggle is a part of the experience of living. Unfortunately, suffering is an inherent part of being alive. And tapping into those emotions with mindfulness, right? Mindfulness allows you to live in those emotions instead of dissociate and distance yourself from them. And being in those emotions allows you to figure out how to deal with them, because your anger is different from my anger. The way you express is going to be different. The way you experience it is going to be different. My sadness is different than your sadness. We experience it different. Like for me, a lot of my emotions come to me as colors and sensations in my skin and in my body. I feel my emotions a lot, very, very physically. And that's also because for years and years and years, I've been practicing, how do I feel sadness? Sometimes I'll just sit and I'll meditate and I'll just cry. And cry and cry and cry. And then I come out, I'm just like, that was interesting. Like, where did I feel the tears start? Where in my face do I feel sadness? Do I feel it in my throat? Do I feel it in my chest, in my arms, in my fingers, in my toes? Where is it? And I think this is all good information. And I think that's one of the reasons mindfulness is a tool, right? It's a mechanism to help us reconnect to ourselves, because as we reconnect to our emotions, we're also connecting to the environment, because our emotions do a number of different things. They teach us about the environment that we're in, right? A lot of African-American and Black and melanated and brown people are pissed right now.
Sure.
It's because we are supposed to be. There are bad things happening. Boundaries have been crossed for our communities. And so we are finally able to experience that. It's okay to be angry. Of course we're angry.
Sure.
You know, like a lot of Black women, I don't want to be the mad Black woman, but there's something for you to be mad about. Let's tap into the fact that you're mad about something, and that's okay. You know, now what do we do about it? And I think what's happened is historically we haven't been able to do anything. And so for a lot of us, mindfulness can be very invalidating because sitting with these emotions, we haven't practiced it. We don't know what to do with all these emotions when they come over us. And so that's why I like to pair mindfulness with what we call distress tolerance. So what do you do now that these emotions come up? Because not just the good ones are going to come up when you're mindful, you're also going to have the flood of thoughts that come. And so a lot of us will try to shut off the mindfulness when these thoughts come. And we'll be like, oh, we're not doing it right. I'm going to go back to what I was doing. No, you are doing it right. You're doing it right.
Mm. Yeah, and what you're saying is, you know, we're going to open it up for questions in a couple minutes, but what you've led us to is this incredible call to action, right? Where we're partnering with Color of Change, and really we're understanding that there needs to be a get out the vote effort. We need to show up at the polls. We need to kind of get our families showing up to the polls. We need to get our communities out there voting early and actively. But at the same time, it's an intense process for us, you know, like, does my vote count? Does it not count? Am I doing this for the ancestors? Am I doing this for my local community? And then also, honestly, now we know enough to understand that waking up the day after the election is going to be
a day.
Yeah, I mean, so can you just speak to that before we open it up to questions, as we kind of think about our Fit for Us community and this great kind of connection that we have with Color of Change? Like, when it comes time for this election, and it's not just the presidential election, right? There's matters to kind of look at that ballot all the way down to the very bottom. Here in Los Angeles, and I have to tell you, there's so many props, you know, so many bills up to worthy of research and investigation before we vote. What do you have to say to kind of like set the table for not just election day, but for us, the day after?
So getting ready for election day, I think this is such a unique year in that there's so many early voters.
That's a lot of sage. We're gonna need a lot. I mean, it's a lot of sage. It's a lot of all that burning. That's a lot. You're gonna need a bigger bowl. That was a big bowl, but you're gonna need the little, like the salad bowl.
I bought a feather to like blow. I've been blowing sage around my house with one of those like magic feathers now, because
you're gonna need a bigger feather. You're gonna need like a whole ostrich, the whole ostrich feather thing.
Like there is, I mean, on a metaphysical level, there is some juju right now. I think we've all felt it.
Yeah.
And there's some bad juju in the air, and this is a very unique year. On a spiritual level, on a political level, on an individual level, on a health level, on an everything level. And what I would say to people is be kind to yourself, right? And I'm not a political expert. I mean, I listen, I read a lot. But whether you feel your vote matters or not, just do it. I feel like if you think it doesn't matter, then just do it. Who cares? Who cares then? And if you feel it does matter, then do it. And I think that we have people in positions of power who are working to stifle our vote, and they wouldn't be doing that if it didn't matter. Right? If it didn't matter, they wouldn't have been taking out mailboxes. They wouldn't be reducing polling places. They wouldn't be trying to get rid of mail-in voting. Those things are happening because at some level it matters, and your voice matters, and the things that you have to say are important. And so I just kind of, I'm a little conservative in the way that I make decisions, and I tend to do the thing that will make the change. So for me, I've already voted. I did early voting. I dropped it off at the registrar's office to make sure, like, I went into the office with my paper, and I was like, look at this envelope. Does it look all right? Is everything? And she like looked at it. She looked at my signature, where it was placed. Was it stuck down right? And she was like, yep, it's good. And I was like, which bucket do I put this in? And I put it in the bucket. I was like, I just wanted to make sure like everything was exactly where it needed to be. For me, that's what worked. And it took me some level of work to do that, because I'm very scared of COVID. I'm not a fan of I do not leave my house if I don't have to. And so it was a big deal for me to like leave the house, to go down there, to have a conversation with a person inside of a building. But I did it because this is important. And when it comes to the day after the election, the African-American community has experienced an intense and incalculable amount of trauma. We don't talk nearly enough about it. We have trauma from society. We have trauma from slavery. We have trauma from watching the news every day. We have trauma from watching Black men, Black women be murdered and televised. You know what I'm saying? We have trauma from courts not taking these cases, from them saying, oh, this wasn't a murder. It just, they were doing their job. That's trauma. And so not to mention we have generational trauma that's passed down to us, but we also are now foisted in a situation where we're living in trauma every day. And so finding ways to build healing into your life. So even if this is a moment with your kids where you read a story about, Black people. My parents used to read me stories from this book called The People Could Fly. So like stories of Blackness and just taking a moment to read a story with your kids, or taking a moment to laugh with your girlfriend or your guy friends, or watch a game. There were games on. Men had basketball for a while. Watch something and fully experience it. Fully watch the game. Eat something delicious and fully do it, because ultimately, mindfulness allows you to realize what you can and cannot control. I cannot control who wins and becomes the president of the United States. I can put my one ballot into one box. I can't dictate who wins. And so when I put that envelope in that box, I left some worry with it mindfully. I said, I have to put this down. And that doesn't mean you don't fight. That doesn't mean you don't speak up. That doesn't mean you don't encourage people, but that means you understand what you can control and what you cannot. I can control how I advocate for people. I can control how I encourage them to vote. I can control how I encourage people to read and educate themselves, but I cannot determine who's going to be the president. And so I have to let that go. So for me, that's what it looks like. So on the day after, because also, honestly, it probably won't be calculated because there's so many mail-in ballots. So we're not going to have a traditional election this year in that way. But I'm working in a lot of things I love.
Anxiety inducing, right?
Yeah.
Even that is stressful, like the waiting,
It's drawn out now. It's drawn out this year, which I think is going to be hard for people. So I say, you can engage in mindful distraction. You can tell yourself, I don't want to focus on the election right now. So mindfully, I'm going to focus on something else. I'm going to read an article about this. I'm going to go out and walk. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to fully be at work. I'm going to fully be with my family, fully do something that gives you like a recharge. Charge your battery. We haven't had an opportunity to charge a lot in this COVID, and give yourself an opportunity to charge back up.
When you say charge your battery, and folks, we're going to close this out in another 5-10 minutes. Please share questions that you have for Dr. Hicks, or any kind of comments or shout outs that you want to share, I guess, in this chat box, right? Unless I'm sort of last man off Zoom on the planet. So unless I'm doing it right, or else unmute and jump in. But talk to us about, those little things that we can do when we wake up the day after the election.
Yeah, wake up and gratitude. Right. And gratitude might seem like such a small thing. And I think sometimes it can feel invalidating, like, well, what do I have to be grateful for? And all of this, But there's a number of studies.
I was going to say wake up in a bathtub full of gin, but like if you say wake up in gratitude, that's something different.
Listen, if you got to drink, do what you got to do.
Just a whole bathtub of like, it's just fine.
If you gotta get some wine out, I'm not I'm not a chemical dependency specialist. But, I would say, work it into your day, right? So I do like to find ways to be grateful. And I actually kind of look at it as a challenge when I'm having my worst moments. Like, what am I grateful for? How do I find a way to do that? Because there's a lot of studies that do show that having a regular habit of tapping into gratitude does help in the long run with symptoms of depression and anxiety. It helps people to feel a little bit better. So that is true. So I say, starting the day off with something that you mildly enjoy, whether that be a really good stretch on the side of your bed, whether that be a few yoga moves. You don't have to do a whole hour and a half of yoga in order to gain benefits from it. Bend over and touch your toes, do a sun salutation, welcome the day, and get moving. Drink some coffee that you really love. Drink the tea that you really enjoy. Fully experience that tea. Put it into your mouth, and if it's not too hot, and think about how it tastes. What part of your mouth does it taste? Does it taste any different on the side? Do you have a tooth that doesn't like that? fully experience what it is you're experiencing. So the day after, try to engage in some level of mindfulness. I also have subscribed to this service called Skim, where they give you like news breakdowns every
I
day.
thought that was Kim Kardashian's Skims.
Skim, it's
Oh.
Skimm. Yeah, so you're like, Skims? Is that? No, no.
I wear those.
You're like, I got that on. She does that too. No, yeah, it's this app that basically looks at like all the news and kind of breaks it down and gives you like a daily, like abridged version of it. And I
Cool.
feel like they're pretty unbiased. And so sometimes because I actually read like 55 million articles a day about everything, and it gets me worked up. But I notice that on days when I just rely on Skim to kind of give me like an overall of what's happening, I just tend to feel a little bit better. And there's no shame in that. You don't have to
Sure.
become the next Bill Maher. You don't have to know everything about everything that's happening in the world, especially if it doesn't align with you and doesn't make you feel good. If it doesn't make you feel good, you don't have to do it now. I mean, because you have to go to work.
Yeah, and also one of the takeaways of this year is like knowing we don't know. And I think that's tough for adults to kind of wrap their head around. Like, it's okay if you want to be ignorant on your own, but now, like, from the top of the government all the way to the bottom, folks, doesn't seem like folks really know, and we've already crossed the threshold of understanding that, and like we're not okay with that, but like that's the reality. And so kind of know, so even I just love the idea that you don't have to be a COVID expert in your family, that you can look at this app like Skim and like see what the relevant data is for the day, and everything doesn't have to be a deep dive into the election or the pandemic or what's happening with the murders of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. Of course, we must remain engaged in our politics and in our community, and defend and progress, but to do it mindfully and sustainably and progressively happens in the ways that you describe in some senses.
Yeah, because if you're so broken down by all the things that you're reading that you're so overwhelmed. I mean, I was literally having chest pain, like during, George Floyd, hearing about Breonna Taylor. I mean, the last video that I watched was Philando Castile, and I mean, it gutted me, right? Gutted for weeks. I was heavy, and I mean, and not that I shouldn't be, right? That's a very normal, typical response, appropriate response to that. But we also have to understand where it is self-preservation and how can I continue to live my life and do the things that I have to do to create the change. How can I create the change if I'm broken? Some people can watch those videos and be activated and be like, yep, this is what we got to do. But if you're not one of those people, you just have to know that you're not one of those people. Like I've had to slow down on some of my COVID stuff because it makes me nervous. And I do know very well, I have made myself into a pseudo COVID expert. And so now I'm like kind of slowing up a little bit. And so I don't need to get the tick of everyone who dies every day. That's not important for Allycin, right? That might be important for somebody else, but I don't need that. And so I had to kind of silence a lot of those feeds for myself. Yeah. But I still get CDC stuff. I still know what to wipe off and what not to wipe off, and how many seconds you're supposed to wash your hands, and are we doing faces and shields today? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's fascinating we talk about that, because again, you've now brought us back to the beginning of when we first met, and you're talking about these small, dedicated, intentional actions, and it doesn't always mean a meditation bowl. It doesn't always mean, like, again, being on the mountaintop. It means going in and curating your news feed for the day after the elections. It means, when you described that experience of having that tea and spending time noticing the different taste notes with that tea, and if the tea was too hot or too cold or all that, those in your description is the very basic bedrock of mindfulness, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's being present with everything you're doing. If you have a blueberry, eat one blueberry and experience that blueberry. What does the skin feel like before you bite down? What tooth are you biting down with? How does it feel on that tooth? How does it feel on the roof of your mouth? Are you a person who kind of smashes food against the top of your mouth, or do you chew it with the front of your teeth, or the side, the left side, the right side? You can really get lost in eating. You can get lost in the experience. And there's also a number of studies that show that mindful eating actually decreases the amount of food people eat. Because when they're focused on what's in their mouth, what's in their body has because the chemical that we use to indicate that we are full sometimes is slower than how quickly we can eat. And so we'll keep eating and eating and eating, even though we are already full. But going slower, taking your time with small things like that can really improve your ability to engage in mindfulness, and it can just improve your quality of life. Because I mean, there are horrible things that are happening, and there will continue to be horrible things that happen, unfortunately. And how do we deal with that?
On a personal level, to put you on the spot, how do you anticipate navigating the next weeks and days, just so we can get an insight on your front line?
So since I voted already, I'm I've taken a little bit of a step back. Like, I actually did not watch the second debate, and I'm like a political monster. Like, I was the girl that had political like debate parties. Like, I was like, we're going to like, so I didn't watch the second debate. But what I did instead was I read a few trusted sources and their perspective on it. And that might not be the most accurate thing to do. But for me, since I've already voted, there's no more information I need. Allycin is done voting, right? I made my decisions. I did my research. And so that, so I've been actually kind of taking a step back on some of the political side and kind of diving more in, for me, the esoteric. I read an article last night about how some people believe that consciousness is actually electromagnetism. So I read that article, and then I ended up writing this random just flight of ideas about consciousness. I meditated for a while on what my consciousness might be and how I feel living in and around my own body. And so I've been taking a pivot toward taking the time that I used to put toward politics, toward things that enrich me. I cried a little bit last night, and I probably will cry the day of and after the election. I kind of take time to almost not make myself cry, but I really take time to tap into my sadness, because it is another emotion. And so for me, that's what's been happening. So I've been kind of putting politics down a little bit. I still have the conversations in my private groups, but I'm relating to them differently. So that's me. I don't even know if I answered your question, but
No, that was awesome. It's just kind of good to kind of get as much insider insight as we can. I mean, the theme for this series, Fit for Us and the Color of Change, is a sanity plan. And I think the prescriptives that you've shared with us and the personal experiences and insights have been exactly what the organizers really hoped for. At least I think so, when it kind of came to sharing these tools with folks out in the community. So on that note, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us. I was super humbled to be in conversation with you and edified by the insights that you shared. Also, on a practical note, shout out to Fit for Us and Color of Change for providing us with the platform to share out these ideas instead of hiding, these little lights under a bushel. And so we really have to be grateful for whether it's the technology or the people who are pushing the buttons, but the folks who kind of really put the pieces together for us to kind of connect and have this conversation. So thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thank you. I love being able to come here and talk to you, your audience. I'm just really in love with the fact that people are tapping into fitness. They're tapping into the fact that, fitness isn't just physical. Mm-hmm. It's spiritual, it's mental, it's everything, the totality, it's social, it's everything that we are. And so I really love your platform. I love everything about Fit for Us.
Awesome. Can you tell folks who want to find you, what's your Instagram?
My Instagram is
what are your best tools? What's the best ways to find you?
Everything is Allycin Hicks, and my name is spelled absolutely bonkers. It is Allycin, Allycin, and Allycin Hicks on IG, on Twitter, and AllycinHicks.com as well. I've been opening up for coaching. I'd actually kind of like slowed the coaching down for a while, and now I'm opening it back up because there's a need now. People need the support at this time, and so if you want any private coaching or anything like that, AllycinHicks.com is where you can find me. Allycin.
Awesome. Dr. Hicks, thank you very much again for taking the time. Fit for Us fam, this is awesome. And I look forward to future conversations. And please stay well over these next days and weeks. And we're going to make it.
All right. We're gonna make it. One thing Black folk do is make it. That's one thing we do.
Heard you.
Right. We're used to making it. This is what
we're going to make it. We're going to make it.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.